The cage and the silence. Rain drummed against the windshield in soft, rhythmic grief. Ethan Ward sat motionless behind the wheel of his old car, parked across from the rust-colored gates of St. Mary's Orphanage. The wipers moved once, twice, before he killed the engine and let the sound of rain consume him. He didn't know why he'd come. He'd meant to go to the cemetery, like always, but his hands had turned the wheel without thought, leading him here. Maybe it was the echo of his late wife's voice, maybe the loneliness. The orphanage loomed ahead, a relic of another century. Through the misted glass, he could see children's shadows running inside, bursts of small, fleeting life framed by the dying light of afternoon. It was strange how easily laughter could slice through sorrow. He hesitated, then stepped out into the rain. Inside, warmth and noise collided around him. Volunteers moved through the hall, arms full of blankets, toys, and worn books. The smell of disinfectant mixed with cocoa and the faint scent of dust. Ethan's presence drew polite glances. He wasn't dressed for charity work. Gray coat, funeral black sweater, eyes that didn't belong to the living. A voice called gently from behind him. "Can I help you?" He turned. Clara Voss stood a few paces away, clipboard in hand, her posture tidy and professional. She smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something tired about her, like a flame burning steadily in an empty room. "I heard you needed volunteers," Ethan said. His voice cracked slightly from disuse. "I play a little piano. I thought I could help with music." Clara blinked, surprised but pleased. "We'd love that. The children adore music." Her tone was warm, but her gaze lingered. She noticed the hollow behind his smile, the quiet ache that wrapped around his words. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror, on long nights when she couldn't sleep beside a husband who no longer reached for her. She led him to the playroom, where the sound of laughter dimmed into the soft chaos of small voices. A half-broken cage-like playpen stood in the corner, meant for toddlers but now holding two older children, one boy, one girl, huddled together beneath a thin blanket. "Noah and Lily," Clara explained. "They came in last month." Still adjusting. The children looked up as Ethan approached. The boy's eyes were sharp with suspicion. The girls were wide, distant, rimmed with tears that never quite fell. He crouched to their level, careful not to startle them. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm Ethan." Neither spoke. The boy turned his face away, but the girl tilted her head, studying him with strange intensity, as if recognizing something wordless. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Please take us home." Ethan froze. The words cut through him with surgical precision. Clara moved forward quickly. "Lily," she murmured, "that's not how we—" But the girl only pressed her face into the blanket, her small shoulders trembling. "It's all right," Ethan said, his throat tight. "She's just asking." The boy, Noah, watched him now, eyes narrowing as though testing whether this man's sadness was real. Ethan didn't look away. For a long moment, the three of them sat in quiet understanding, grief recognizing grief. When Clara finally spoke, her voice was soft. "They've been through a lot. Their parents died in a fire. They keep asking to go home, but they don't seem to know what home means anymore." Ethan nodded. "Neither do I." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Clara's expression shifted, touched by something unspoken, then quickly hidden. Later, when the children were called to dinner, Ethan found himself standing by the cracked window, listening to the rain. Clara joined him, arms folded. "You can come back tomorrow," she said quietly, "if you want. The music room could use some life." He turned to her. "Are you sure? I'm not good at much anymore." "You showed up," she said simply. "That's a start." Their eyes met, briefly, almost by accident, but the air between them held a fragile warmth. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Two souls adrift in their separate emptiness, accidentally colliding in a room full of children. When Ethan stepped back into the rain, the sound felt softer somehow. The ache in his chest still pulsed, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, something dangerously close to hope. He looked back once. Through the orphanage window, He could see Clara bending to comfort Lily, her hand brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. Noah watched protectively, the faintest smile ghosting his lips. The sight struck Ethan like a memory of the life he'd lost. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with an old reminder. Anniversary dinner, 6 p.m. The notification he could never bring himself to delete. He silenced it without looking. As he walked to his car, the children's whisper echoed in his mind, wrapping around the rain and the hollow beat of his footsteps. Please take us home. The words followed him through the night, clinging like ghosts to the sound of the falling rain. And though he told himself he would not return, Ethan Ward already knew he would. The visits. The following Sunday, Ethan returned to St. Mary's. He told himself it was only to bring a few instruments, a small keyboard, a battered guitar, a tin whistle that still carried his wife's fingerprints. But deep down, he knew better. The orphanage looked softer in the daylight, less like a relic, more like a refuge patched together by weary hands. Children's voices filled the corridors like sunlight breaking through old curtains. Somewhere in that chaos, Clara's laughter threaded faintly through, light but practiced. She appeared at the doorway to the music room, a stack of papers in her arms and a smudge of chalk on her sleeve. "You came back," she said, not surprised, just quietly relieved. "I said I would," he replied. "And most people don't." There was no bitterness in her tone, only weary knowledge. Ethan smiled faintly, setting the keyboard on the low table near the window. The children began to gather, curiosity glowing in their faces. Among them were Noah and Lily, still cautious, but watching him with something close to trust. He began to play a simple tune, slow, tender, almost shy. The melody wound through the room like breath after a long silence. Small hands clapped offbeat. Laughter filled the spaces between notes, and for a while, the world didn't feel so heavy. Clara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. The light from the window caught her hair, turning the brown to gold. She hadn't smiled like that in months. When the lesson ended, the children scattered toward the dining hall, leaving behind echoes of their joy. Ethan lingered to pack the instruments, but Clara didn't move to leave. "They like you," she said. "That's rare. It usually takes weeks. I think they see through people faster than adults do." Clara looked at him then, really looked. "You talk like someone who's had to rebuild from ashes." He hesitated. "I lost my wife 2 years ago. Drunk driver. One moment she was humming beside me, and the next, his voice trailed into silence. I stopped playing music after that. The house felt too empty for sound." Clara's gaze softened. "And yet you brought music here." "I don't know if I brought it," he said quietly. "Maybe it followed the ones who needed it most." The room went still for a heartbeat. Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the glass. The sound filled the silence between them like a shared heartbeat. Then Clara spoke, her voice lower, almost a confession. "My husband, Daniel, he doesn't really notice me anymore. We live in the same house, but it's like passing a stranger in the hallway. I volunteer here because it's the only place I still feel seen." Ethan turned toward her. There was no pity in his eyes, only understanding. "Sometimes," he said, "we mistake survival for living." Their eyes met, longer this time, steadier. Something unspoken crossed between them, a recognition of the same wound wearing different faces. The lights flickered, then died. The storm outside had deepened, thunder growling in the distance. Clara reached for a candle from a shelf, her fingers brushing his as they both struck a match. The small flame bloomed between them, trembling like something alive. In the flickering glow, Ethan noticed the thin scar along her wrist, an old burn, faded but real. She caught his glance and withdrew her hand. "I spilled boiling tea years ago," she said quickly, though her voice carried something else, something unspoken. Ethan nodded, sensing her need to retreat. "We all have marks we don't talk about." They sat in silence for a moment, the candlelight painting their shadows onto the wall. Two outlines, close but never touching. When the power returned, the children's laughter echoed from the corridor, pulling Clara back into the rhythm of duty. She stood, smoothing her skirt, but her voice trembled faintly. "You should come again next week. The kids will ask for you." He nodded, slipping the tin whistle into his pocket. "If you want me to." "I do." There was no hesitation in her tone this time. As he walked out into the courtyard, the rain had softened to a mist. The air smelled of wet earth and faint electricity. Clara stood at the doorway, watching him go, the candlelight behind her casting a golden outline around her form. Ethan paused at the gate and looked back. Their eyes met through the drizzle. Too far to speak, close enough to feel. For the first time since the accident, he didn't feel entirely alone. He drove home in silence, his mind replaying the scene again. The children's laughter, Clara's voice, the tremble in her smile. Each memory carried warmth and danger in equal measure. In the quiet of his kitchen, he set the tin whistle on the table beside a half-empty cup of tea. The wind outside brushed against the window, whispering faintly like a lullaby. He thought of Clara's words, "It's the only place I still feel seen." Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes. The rain began again, gentle and persistent, echoing against the glass like the faint memory of her voice. He didn't know what he was becoming drawn into, only that it was no longer grief alone. It was something alive, something fragile and forbidden, already threading its way into the hollow spaces of his heart. Outside, thunder murmured once more, distant but coming closer. And in the small orphanage across town, Clara stood by the window, fingers pressed against the glass, watching the rain as though searching for someone in its rhythm. The breaking point. The following weeks moved like the slow turning of seasons, subtle, unannounced, inevitable. Ethan found himself at St. Mary's almost daily, always under the pretense of helping the children. Yet even he knew that wasn't the truth anymore. The music lessons had become a language for something deeper, an unspoken exchange between two wounded souls who found in each other a reflection of everything they'd lost. Clara's husband, Daniel, had begun to notice. He didn't come to the orphanage, but his presence lingered around Clara like invisible chains. His texts grew sharper, colder. "Dinner at 7. Be home. Stop wasting time with other people's children." Each word pressed into her chest until breathing around him felt like disobedience. One Thursday evening, the air in the orphanage was heavy with summer heat. The children's laughter carried faintly from the hall as Clara lingered in the now-empty music room. Ethan was at the old, upright piano, coaxing a hesitant melody from the worn keys. "Your playing sounds different," Clara said softly. He looked up. "Different how?" "Alive," she replied, almost whispering it, like it remembers how to feel again. Ethan smiled faintly, but his eyes remained on the keys. "Maybe because I'm not playing for ghosts anymore." Something in her chest shifted, an ache or maybe a spark. She stepped closer, close enough that their shadows merged on the wall. For a long moment, neither spoke. The piano filled the silence, slow and searching. Then Clara said, "Daniel found your name in my messages. He thinks I'm having an affair." Ethan's fingers stilled. "And are you?" She didn't flinch. "I don't know." The honesty hung in the air like confession. "I haven't touched you," he said quietly. "No," she murmured. "But you see me. That's sometimes worse." Her voice trembled, not from shame, but from relief. Relief at speaking the truth aloud. Ethan rose from the piano bench. They stood close enough now that the air between them trembled. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her into the silence that had defined him for too long, but he didn't. "I don't want to be the reason you lose what's left of your life," he said. "And I don't want to go back to a life that's already lost," she replied. The door creaked open then, breaking the fragile spell. Lily peeked in, holding a crumpled paper drawing. Noah followed, his small hand gripping the edge of her dress. "Look," Lily said proudly, holding up the picture. It showed 4 figures drawn in bright crayons, a tall man, a woman, and 2 children beneath a big sun. At the top, in shaky letters, she'd written, "Our family." Clara's eyes filled instantly. "Oh, sweetheart," her voice broke. Ethan crouched to meet their gaze, forcing a smile that didn't quite hold. "That's beautiful." Lily beamed. "That's you and Miss Clara. We made it together." Noah nodded solemnly. "You could take us home now." The The words, innocent and piercing, shattered whatever fragile balance had remained. Clara covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Ethan looked away, the ache in his chest almost unbearable. Clara knelt, pulling the children into her arms. Her voice was steady but raw. "You already are home," she whispered. "Right here with us." The moment stretched, painful, pure, impossible. Later, after the children were asleep, Clara lingered in the corridor with Ethan. The light flickered above them, a tired bulb humming softly. "They shouldn't have drawn that," she said, clutching the paper to her chest. "It's not fair to them." Ethan looked at her, his voice low. "Children only draw what they see." She closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat, he thought she would walk away. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand just once, but it was enough. Electricity, longing, and grief fused into one unbearable pulse. "Clara, I know," she whispered. "We can't." But neither moved. The sound of rain began again outside, soft and steady, as if the world itself was listening. She stepped back finally, her breath uneven. "I need to go. Daniel will be waiting." Ethan's chest tightened. "He doesn't deserve your loyalty." "It's not about him anymore," she said. "It's about who I used to be, and whether that woman can still look at herself in the mirror." He nodded, understanding even as it tore him apart. Clara turned toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "If I don't come back," she began, then stopped herself. "Take care of them. They love you." The door clicked shut behind her, and the echo lingered long after she was gone. Ethan stood alone in the dim hallway, the drawing still clutched in his hand. The crayon figures blurred beneath the sheen of his tears. He placed it carefully atop the piano, beside the candle he'd lit hours ago. Its flame flickered weakly, struggling to hold against the night. For a moment, he thought he heard Lily's voice again, soft, sleepy, filled with trust. "Please take us home." Ethan closed his eyes. The sound wasn't from memory this time. It was a promise forming quietly in his soul. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, distant but drawing near. Home. Winter came quietly that year, folding the city in gray stillness and pale light. The orphanage, once alive with laughter, had grown quieter too. A notice tacked to the front gate read, "St. Mary's Orphanage will close its doors on December 1st. Ethan stood beneath that sign, hands buried in his coat pockets, breath fogging in the cold air. The world felt smaller now, emptier. Clara hadn't returned since that night. Her absence lingered in every corner like a song unfinished. Inside, the hall smelled of dust and fading paint. Boxes lined the corridors, filled with worn toys and bundled blankets. The children were being relocated, different foster homes, new lives. All except two. Noah and Lily waited in the playroom, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside their battered suitcase. Their drawing, the one that had once broken Clara's heart, was folded neatly on top. Lily looked up as Ethan entered, her small face lighting. "You came," she whispered, as if she doubted he would. "I said I would, didn't I?" Ethan crouched beside them. "Are you ready?" The boy nodded, gripping his sister's hand. "They said we're going to a new place, but we won't go with you." Ethan felt the weight of those words settle deep inside him. He had tried to resist it, to tell himself he was only a visitor, that love was something he no longer had the right to offer. But every time he looked at them, he saw fragments of the life he'd lost and the life he might still build. "I spoke with the board," he said softly. "If you want, you can come home with me." Lily's eyes widened. "Really?" He smiled, a real one, small but certain. "Really?" The children threw their arms around him, their warmth cutting through the cold like sunlight. For the first time in 2 years, Ethan didn't feel like a ghost wandering through memory. He felt alive. The adoption papers took weeks, but the process passed in a blur of signatures and waiting rooms. Clara's name appeared once. She had listed Ethan as a trusted contact in her volunteer file. It was the only trace she'd left behind. When the final approval came through, Ethan took Noah and Lily home. The house, long silent and shuttered, came alive again. Laughter spilled through the rooms. Soft music drifted from the piano, and the walls, once heavy with grief, learned to hold joy again. On the mantel sat a single-framed photo of his late wife, Anna. Ethan often caught himself talking to her in the quiet hours. "You'd have loved them," he'd say. "They needed someone, and maybe I did too." Outside, the first snow began to fall. Noah pressed his hand against the window pane, tracing shapes in the frost. Lily sat at the piano, playing the three-note melody Ethan had taught her. Their laughter filled the space where sorrow used to live. One evening, as the children slept, Ethan heard the faintest knock on the door. He opened it to find Clara standing there, wrapped in a long gray coat, snow gathering on her hair like ash. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Time folded in on itself, drawing them back to that candlelit room, that almost confession. "I shouldn't have come," she said, voice low. I needed to see that they were safe." "They are," he replied. "They're home now." She smiled faintly, eyes shining with tears she didn't bother to hide. "I knew you'd keep your promise." He hesitated. "And you? Are you all right?" Clara exhaled, her breath fogging the cold air. "I left him. It wasn't about you. It was about remembering who I am." She looked past him, into the warm light of the house. "I didn't think I'd ever find peace again. But seeing them here, seeing you," her words trailed into the wind. Ethan wanted to reach out, to ask her to stay, but something held him back. Perhaps they both knew this wasn't a story meant for reunion. It was a story meant for healing. "You gave me back music," he said instead. "For that, I'll always be grateful." Clara smiled through her tears. "And you gave me the courage to start over." They stood in silence, snowflakes spiraling between them. Then, slowly, she reached in her coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded paper. It was the children's drawing, the same one she'd held that night. "I kept this," she whispered. "It reminded me that love doesn't always fit the shape we expect." Ethan unfolded it, smoothing the creases with careful hands. The crayon figures, man, woman, children beneath the sun, seemed brighter now, as if time itself had colored them with forgiveness. When he looked up again, Clara was already turning to leave. "Clara," he called softly. She paused. "They'll want to see you again, when you're ready." Her smile, faint and trembling, was the last thing he saw before she disappeared into the snow. Later that night, Ethan sat by the fire, the children asleep upstairs. The drawing lay on the table beside a cup of untouched tea. He thought of Clara, of Anna, of every fragment of love he'd lost and somehow found again in the unlikeliest of places. Outside, snow whispered against the window pane, a lullaby for the living. He closed his eyes, listening. From somewhere upstairs, a small, sleepy voice murmured through the quiet. "Good night, Dad." Ethan smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. The sound of the children's breathing filled the house. And for the first time, Ethan Ward understood that home was never a place. It was a promise kept, even after everything else was gone.